I want to bring in HLN legal analyst Joey Jackson, as well as CNN law enforcement analyst James Galliano, and also Mac Hardy. He is the director of operations for the National Association of School Resource Officers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me. Joey, you know, defense is coming back hard here. They are calling this a political stunt. They said in court today the charges, they shouldn't be able to stand because Peterson, they say, isn't a caregiver. What do you make of these arguments?
I make of the arguments that they're very effective. Just backing up a minute, this is a tragic situation, and you obviously feel for, and there are no words that could describe or could console the parents of these children, that could console anyone who is injured, whether they're teacher, staff, certainly the children that were killed that day and injured that day. Your heart goes out. You don't know what to say. I mean, perhaps we should be talking about the issue of gun violence and gun control and sensible laws, et cetera, as we look at Peterson there in court. But on the critical issue of the law, Lynn, which is what I want to turn to, because the facts are damning, and I think people perhaps are yelling at the screen, what do you mean, bury him in jail, let him be there forever, it's outrageous, what he did, it's sad, it's sickening. I agree with all of that in terms of what he did being wrong, and what he did being in complete abdication of his responsibility, and what he did being abhorrent. Get all of it. Let's talk about the law for one moment. In 2005, the Supreme Court determined, Scalia being the person really with the impetus of the decision, that said that essentially law enforcement does not have a constitutional duty or obligation to otherwise provide for the protection of people, right? So what happens is that in essence what that legal opinion is saying is that law enforcement, yes, you're imbued with a certain authority, etc., but that there's no constitutional duty to protect people. That's number one, and therefore that's a constitutional argument. The second one, quickly, is this, is that the statute in terms of child neglect is written for caretakers. Law enforcement people are not care providers, and as such cannot be held accountable. And so what I think will ultimately happen is that this will go before a jury and he'll be convicted. But what I think this really will be settled, it'll be settled by an appellate court that makes the final assessment of whether or not legally you can do this. And so finally, just to be clear, I'm extraordinarily sympathetic to the facts in this case and to the arguments that occurred from a legal perspective. The human side of me says bury him alive. The legal part of me says legally you can't do it, and if he's convicted, it's coming back.
And James, to that point, in whether or not law enforcement, as Joey points out, they have no legal obligation to protect us. I mean, that's sort of frightening in and of itself. You lose trust in law enforcement if you don't know for sure that they have to act. But I want to play for you sound from one of the parents. They are so very adamant that the officer knew what was going on in the building and did nothing. Listen.
It's very clear he knew what was happening. It's very clear to me he knew where the shots were coming from inside the building. And it was very clear he took a defensive position behind a cement pillar and stayed there for 48 minutes, even while other law enforcement responded and went in the building.
He needs to go to jail, and he needs to serve a lifetime in prison for not going in that day and taking down the threat.
Joey, what do you think, or I'm sorry, James, what do you think in that video, in the surveillance video, led police to bring these charges?
Well, Lynn, first of all, mark this day down, because it is seldom that I disagree with my colleague and friend, Joey Jackson. Joey laid out perfectly what the law is here, and here's what I'm going to argue. I watched that video. I've seen all of it. It is mind-numbingly stomach-churning as a former law enforcement officer to watch a peace officer, someone who is sworn to protect and serve and defend, and is placed at a school, which is where we have our children studying in a supposedly safe place, and literally stood outside for 3/4 of an hour while rifle rounds were ricocheting around inside that very building. It is sickening. The argument is, look, we have precedent on this. The Supreme Court, as Joey pointed out, has ruled against holding law enforcement officers accountable for lack of valor. I'm going to argue something different. If you can prove that his inaction, not his actions, but his inactions led to additional deaths there, when his job, his profession as a sworn peace officer was to enter that building and engage that gunman, if you can prove that lives were lost during that time when he did not intercede, I argue he should go to jail for the rest of his life.
Joey, I'll get your reaction to that in a second, but Mac, I want to go to you. I mean, what's the protocol? What are you told? You have to go in?
Well, with the National Association of School Resource Officers, we do teach that it's direct to threat. When you detect danger, we go direct to threat. Pre-Columbine, they surrounded, held things inside, and we found out after Columbine that is not the way to do it, and direct to threat was formed. It changed over the years, but we have to go in, we have to stop this, because we know that every second we wait, children are losing their lives.
And is the parents that are sitting at home so desperately watching that video knowing that he could have gone in? I want to play more sound of some of those parents and their reaction. Listen.
We miss our children every day, and there's nothing that's going to bring them back, and we know that. But it just hurts so much, and I know that whatever accountability comes our way doesn't bring back.
We're pleased to see again some accountability for this tragedy that took the life of my daughter and 16 other wonderful people.
Mac, what is it like for you and other school resource officers to be there at a school every day knowing the lives of these parents' children are in your hands?
Well, it's a lot of responsibility. As a father of 3 myself, I want the person inside the school that I think that I would have been in a situation like that. I've asked my resource officers when I was a supervisor, would you want yourself to be the resource officer at the school where your children go to school? Because we have to consider those kids inside that school our kids, that campus, our campus, and we got to take a lot of pride in that. We have to work with the community, we have to work with the school administration and all the teachers to secure that school and make sure that it's as safe as possible. We can't guarantee total safeness in those buildings, but hearing those parents talk really brings it to light while we do what we do, and we try to educate and we try to teach school resource officers in about every state in the United States how to keep schools safe, as safe as possible. We know that it's not 100%, but we have to do things better, and we have to continue to learn and improve on it, and don't let things like this happen again.
And as we know, and many times you're putting your life on the line if you do go in. We are acutely aware of that. Joey, I just want to get your reaction to what James said. He's saying, listen, regardless of what the Supreme Court says, it's the inaction. If they can prove that, they might be successful. Do you agree?
I think it's an outstanding argument, and I think that it will have a lot of support. Perhaps amongst judges it may. But the reality is that I think everyone who looks at this I mean, we're frightened as we look at the video there, and he's cowering, and people like James Galliano, who has served his country with distinction and knows that if he were in that position, he'd die for his fellow mankind. Unfortunately, this officer did not have his mentality, and so I do not disagree with the passion that James Galliano speaks to. I don't disagree with the notion that we hire people to do their job. I don't disagree with the notion that people, I'm sure, more have died as a result of what he did. What I'm speaking to is the bigger legal picture, and I think the bigger legal picture says that, this has been resolved, and the Constitution suggests that officers don't have that responsibility, number one. Number two, the caretaker issue, they're not caretakers, and think about the precedent it will set if we start prosecuting officers throughout the country for failing to act with valor and distinction in the face of adversity, and so that's what we have to look at here.
As I know, as you point out, Joey, very well, how upsetting that would be to families, because a lot of this comes down to just the anguish of watching this video, knowing that their child's life might have been saved had this man acted. Joey, James, Mac, thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Lynn.